everybody. You are tuned into PE with Coach Matt. This is the first episode. I'm really excited to share some information with you around physical education and get you motivated to achieve your fitness goals.
All right, so let's first talk about what is the purpose of this show and who is it for? Well, who is it for? This show is for anybody. If you have any interest in learning more about physical activity, better understanding what the best things to do physical activity-wise for you, then this show is for you. It's for seniors, it's for children, young athletes, and it's for everybody in between. You can be an elite level athlete, or you can be somebody who is currently not physically active at all. The concepts that I will be discussing and the activities that I will be demonstrating, these are, they can be scaled for anybody to do. And so why do I call it PE? I think we identify PE with what we did in school when we were kids. And if we had a good physical education program, we were playing games, but we were also learning a variety of ways to exercise. And that's what this is. I want to introduce a lot of different options, and then you can choose what you like to do. Because that's one of the keys. It's got to be fun, the fun factor. So you don't have to do something that you don't want to do. And there will be a type of physical activity that you will love, and I want to help you find that. The other reason I chose to call this PE is the E part of it is really important, the education. So not only am I going to show you what you can do and encourage you to follow along in some cases, but I also want you to understand why you would be doing that. Understanding the basics of exercise science and how you can apply them based on your situation. All right, so a little bit about myself. I grew up in California, Northern California, and I've been a lifelong athlete. I love it. It's my primary form of expression, and I decided that I wanted to do this as a career. And now I've been coaching for 11 years. I moved out to Boston about 8 years ago. I coached out there. I moved to Bath, Maine about 3 years ago. And soon after I moved here, I got hooked up with Lisa Hall, who was the owner of Ship City Fitness. But last year, a little over a year ago, Brandon McCoy took over, and he is now the owner of Ship City. And I work here as a partner, as an independent contractor, but I want to bring in Brandon for a moment to talk a little bit about his involvement here.
Hey guys, I'm the owner of here at Ship City Fitness, and I've been the owner here for the past year. I used to work with Ed and Lisa very closely on the martial arts program, all the fitness programs that Lisa had run for the past several years. I originally started doing Taekwondo with Ed Hall back in 2005, so my previous history with fitness was a martial arts background. I did that for the past 12 years and decided to generalize my fitness experience with a little bit more strength training, some movement training, and have been really specializing in powerlifting over the past year. So when I took over the gym, my shift in focus was to change this place into the local strength and conditioning facility of the community. We really want to help everybody focus on their own fitness journey wherever they start and try to get you to the next level on where you aspire to be. So the key with our programming is to try to get you to the next level in any way, shape, or form that needs to be done. We just really want to make sure that everybody here feels comfortable, goes at their own pace, and is willing to work hard the minute they step through the door.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yep, not a problem.
Yeah, and I can't advocate for this place enough. We're a small, locally owned business. We are by Bath, for Bath. Oh, really, we serve also the other communities immediately surrounding us. So when you spend $1 here, it stays in the community and it's helping out local people to serve the local community. Okay, so I want to next get into my philosophy in training. So there's a lot of information that you may be hearing that seems to be contradictory around fitness. You may be hearing from some people that this type of exercise is really bad for you, where in another conversation you're hearing that it's really good for you. And I think as a culture, we are struggling a little bit around fitness and to find purpose in fitness, where now in modern society, you could live your life without being physically active at all, and you can sustain yourself that way. Well, it's not necessary in order to earn an income or support yourself while being physically active. So in that sense, the purpose has been lost a little bit. Where at the same time, our health outcomes in this country are really disappointing. And you can look at the statistics around the amount that we spend on health care. You could look at our rate of non-communicable diseases, diet, and lack of physical activity, and how that relates to our poor health outcomes, or less than stellar outcomes. So my philosophy is all around bringing purpose to physical activity, because you can also look at all the research that shows how beneficial physical activity is in every sense, not just for your body, and not just to make you look good, look better, but also in the way that you feel, both physically, where you're able to be moving gracefully through your daily activities and you're able to do it pain-free, but also what that does for you psychologically and how that can really make you have a greater sense of purpose, feel more confident, and generally just be happier. I know there's a lot of people that may be struggling with this, and even people who are fit and seemingly healthy and happy, they still have a lot of questions. So I'm hoping that we can discuss this together. And I mentioned activities of daily living, and that's what I center all of my exercises around. We want to be able to move gracefully through our day, and we want to not be hindered by any limitations. So if we have to pick up a box that weighs 30 pounds, we don't even have to think about that. That's not going to be a limitation for us at all. If we have to climb up 3 flights of stairs, that's no problem. So keeping that in mind as you design your organized exercise. And so one of the first things to consider is your motivation. What's motivating you to exercise? And I mentioned briefly, I think a lot of us think about the way that we look, and that's the first thing that we think about. Why do we want to exercise? Because we want to look better. And that's an important motivator, and it has a place in understanding a reason for why we're exercising. But there's something a little bit deeper, perhaps. And if you can get to a point where you have found physical activities that you really love to do, then you're not even going to be thinking about getting enough exercise anymore, because you're going to set up your whole life around those physical activities. So that's the ultimate goal. That's the highest motivator. I want to help to get to that point. I want to help you get to that point. But it takes a step-by-step process in order to do that. And one of the first steps I think that you can take is to ask yourself some questions. this is the process that I take my clients through. And the first thing we do is we ask some questions. So I'm going to ask you these questions. You can write this down or you can think it aloud. Okay, so first of all, what's motivating you to even watch this show right now? From there, think about this. Think back. What is your background in physical activity? Throughout your lifetime, and then maybe in the last 5 years, and then also in the last year. So consider that for a moment. What have you been doing physical activity-wise? And then think about this. What physical activities do you love? Are there any that you know that you already love? From there, let's think about this. Think about your physical limitations. Are there any movements that are causing you pain? Are there any activities that you know that you can't do because you have an injury perhaps, or any other aversion to this activity? Did you have surgery on a joint? So think about your medical history and consider that. But now let's look ahead. What do you envision for your physical activity journey? Where would you like to be? So now that you are thinking about this, I want to now talk about the human body. I want to talk about posture. And I want to do this by looking at each joint individually so we can understand the possibilities for human movement. And also, so you can do this along with me here. What we're going to do is we're going to start from the top and work our way down and discuss each joint of the body and the range of motion that you have and that you would ultimately like to keep, and also relating that to the idea that each joint will also sometimes serve as a stabilizing force, and your ability to be able to contract the muscles around a joint in order to stabilize it for certain activities. That's part of being physically fit and well-rounded. So I want to start with the neck. And this is what tends to happen. The neck falls forward, it rotates forward, and the chin shoots forward. So generally speaking, if we're doing organized training, and even just activities of daily living, you have to always think about tucking the chin back. So this, by the way, this is the cervical spine from the shoulders through the head, and you need to be able to maintain your ability to extend the cervical spine. So not only that, you're also afforded this rotation to look side to side. So one of the biggest things that we lose is our ability to extend and then rotate the spine, the cervical spine. And if we're constantly like this, and then we're rotating over, what can happen is we can pinch our nerves. And that's obviously not going to be beneficial because we'll feel that pain and we'll lose functioning on all the way down through our arms. And so from the cervical spine, we'll next move down to the shoulder blades. The shoulder blades are really a stabilizing force. You could look at the range of motion that I get. I can detract, I can retract, I can elevate, and I can depress my shoulder blade. But what we tend to do is we tend to shrug up and round forward. So what we need to do in our organized physical activity, and also be conscious of this throughout our activities of daily living, is to be able to retract and depress the scapula. Going on to the shoulder. The shoulder is so closely related to the scapula, and you can look at the full range of motion that you are afforded at your shoulder. And being able to maintain this range of motion is going to be beneficial. The relation between the scapula and the shoulder is Well, the question becomes, can you keep the shoulder blade retracted while going through full shoulder range of motion? If you can't do this, then what ends up happening is you load the front end of the shoulder, and if you have any shoulder limitations or if you've had a shoulder injury, a lot of times it's due to the fact that we tend to load the shoulder forward like this. So we've got to be able to retract it. And also keeping in mind that the shoulder, being able to stabilize the shoulder at any given point in the range of motion is something that's going to be beneficial for us and something that we should be training. We're training the shoulder stability at all points in its range of motion. Next, we'll talk about the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine runs the extent of your rib cage. And again here, look what tends to happen. We tend to round the thoracic spine. We need to train to be able to extend the thoracic spine, and also from here, be able to rotate the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine and the lumbar spine are related in this way. So the lumbar spine, if you take a look at a skeleton, you'll see that those are the fattest discs of our spine that we have. They are not designed to flex and bend. You have a little bit of range of motion there, but not a lot. And what you do not want to try to mobilize your lumbar spine. You want to stabilize around the lumbar spine. So lumbar spine, you get a little bit of rotation as well, but what tends to happen is we lose our ability to extend our thoracic spine and around the thoracic spine and rotate from the thoracic spine. So we start to have that rotation happening at the lumbar spine. Hence, we get lower back pain and we get herniated discs around the lumbar spine. If you look at the muscles associated with and surrounding the lumbar spine, they encase around the spine. And when you contract all of those muscles in balance, it creates a suction cup around the spine. It stabilizes your lumbar spine. That is how when you hear core training, that's what we mean by core training. Your ability to contract the muscles around and stabilize your lumbar spine so that you can have shoulder range of motion and rotation of your shoulders while keeping the lumbar spine in a neutral position. So now we go down to the hips, and it's the same idea. Can you bring your hips through their full range of motion while keeping the lumbar spine in a neutral position? And this is what tends to happen. We go to bend down to pick something up off the ground. We don't have adequate hip mobility. So then we round, and then we load the lumbar spine, and then we have lower back pain. So being conscious of lumbar spine stability is one of the biggest, most important concepts that we can go over. All right? But just like with the shoulder, the hip also oftentimes serves as a stabilizer. So if I, for some reason, need to go down and drop my weight down from a split stance position like this and hold this position, I want to have the strength and stability around my spine to be able to hold that position. We'll go down to the knee next. And the knee is a hinge joint. And I guess I can talk about the elbow in the same way, very similar joints. They're both more or less hinge joints. And elbow issues, though they are a consideration, they're far less common than knee issues. How many of you have knee pain? Well, what tends to happen here, the most common reason for the knee pain is that we have malalignment of the knee relative to the hip and the ankle. So when you load your knee, you want the force to be going directly through the middle of the joint in most cases. Any deviation from that is going to be less than optimal. And so what people tend to do, they either have too much internal rotation of the hip, so then that's going to load the inside of the knee too much. A little bit less commonly, the opposite will happen. And in a forward back sense, if we are loading our knee too far forward, so our knee is shooting forward and putting all the weight up on the front part of the knee, that's again going to be less than optimal. And then you'll be wearing and tearing the joints, the ligaments and tendons associated with your knee. You'll mess up your meniscus. You'll be more likely to have ACL, MCL tear. So just being conscious of the fact that you want to load the knee right through the middle. And I'm going to talk a lot about how to do that through common activities of daily living. So then the last joint we have is the ankle. And we can look at the ankle and the wrist. They're similar in a lot of ways, where you want to have this full range of motion both at the ankle and the wrist. And one of the most common faults with the ankle is that people tend to over-supinate or over-pronate. Generally, what we want to do for most activities of daily living, we want to be able to have full flexion and extension of the ankle without defaulting into an over-supinated or over-pronated position. And I think the most common fault or way that we lose functioning of the ankle is in our ability to keep that neutral positioning of the ankle in an inside-outside sense while being able to pick up the toes. Especially for seniors, if we're talking about fall prevention exercises, this is the biggest thing. Can you maintain this ability to flex up your ankle without coming into an overly supinated or pronated ankle position? And also with the hand, carpal tunnel syndrome, loss of functioning of our ability to grip, loss of functionality with our wrist and hand in general. The biggest one is being able to spoil the fingers while we extend the wrist. So maintaining this strength is really important. Okay, so the last thing I want to do for today is I want to take you through my basic physical assessment. And this is the next part of it. So we've discussed our goals. We have some idea for how the body generally functions. So now let's test our ability with, and we're going to be very particular about the test that we choose to do. A good test, it is assessing your ability to do the things that are most important for you to be doing. And this might not be, there's a bunch of different tests that are out there. This is one that I've created for myself because it's touching on the activities of daily living. If you look at the things that you may need to do throughout your day, they can loosely be categorized within a few, they can be put into a few different categories. And these tests will be assessing your ability to do those movement concepts. So, well, the first thing you can do is to take your heart rate. And if you are unfamiliar with how to do this, you can take 2 fingers, you can put them right in your jugular here. If you stick it right into the groove and press down lightly, you may be able to feel your pulse. Alternatively, you can go right from the thumb, slide down the thumb. There's a little groove right here, and you should be able to feel your pulse if you press down pretty firmly there. Then count your beats, and also look at a clock and count 15 seconds. How many beats do you get in those 15 seconds? You multiply that by 4, and you have your heart rate. Having some idea for what your resting heart rate is, I think, is a good idea. now let's go into more of the physical assessments. And the first thing we are going to look at is your hip hinge. Okay, and this is where we're going to test how much hip mobility do you have while being able to keep your spine in a neutral position. So I like to use a pipe. I have this PVC pipe. You can also use like a wooden dowel. You may have something like this around your house even. And what you're going to do is you're going to put this behind your back. You're going to have this post in contact with your tailbone, with your shoulder blades, and your head. So you have to keep those 3 points of contact and then go down as if you're going to go pick something up off of the ground. So you'll hinge at the hips. Notice that my hips go back, my knees stay back, and my head is forward out in front of my toes. And the most common fault here is that the tailbone will come off. If we're rounding our spine, the tailbone will come off. We have to think almost to arch the back slightly in order to keep that contact. And now if we can go down to a point where our torso is maybe not 90 degrees, but maybe about 75 degrees, that is really good. And if you can keep those 3 points of contact while you do that, that's excellent. The next test will be a squat. And here we can talk about the difference between a squat and a hip hinge. So if I wanted to pick something up off the ground, this is what I would do. See how much hip bend I'm getting? And look at my knee angle. I'm bending my knee a little bit, not that much though, but I'm bending my hip a lot. Okay, so that's distinct from a squat. Squat's a little different. In this, a situation where you would use a squat, if you have a book and you're gonna put it down low on a bookshelf, that's where I would wanna do a squat. And look at my positioning here. I have a lot of knee bend and a lot of hip bend. So I'm bending my knee a lot more for a squat. And so what I can do here, and by the way, all of these tests are scalable. If I'm already a really active person and I do weightlifting already, I know how to do deadlifts and I know how to do squats, well, I can actually do this assessment with a barbell or a dumbbell weighted. You can do the same thing. But I'm more going to do this, these tests are for anybody, even for complete beginners. So this version of the squat is a beginner's squat where I'm going to do an assisted squat. I'm going to hold onto a post, extend my arms out about belly button height. I'm going to set my feet slightly wider than my hips. I got to keep my heels down. And then what I'm going to test is how low can I squat down. So the squats happen in 3 parts. The first is standing tall. The second is to do a hip hinge. It's the same exact movement that you just did. But then from there, I'm going to bend the knees and drop as low as I can. And I don't want my knees to collapse in because then I'm loading the inside of my knee too much. I want the force to go directly through the knee. And in order to do that, my shoulders have to come forward because my hips are going back. And then once I go to the bottom, I'm going to stand tall up out of it. And then I can do a couple of repetitions of this and test my range of motion and control with the squat. Okay, third test is a pull down motion. So what I have here set up, I have a band that I've put and I've wrapped around overhead. And you can see the band that I have. It's one of these open loop bands with handles. There's also there's a couple different kinds of bands. Really anything will do, and just wrap it up somewhere overhead. And then I'm going to have a seat, and I'm going to sit directly underneath the point of attachment of the band. And then from here, I'm going to raise my arms completely overhead. This is the most important part of the test, my overhead shoulder mobility. Can I get to the point where my wrist is directly over the top of my shoulders? And you can you may notice that there's no tension on my band right now. That's okay. There will be tension at the bottom. So then I'm going to go through a pull down motion. So I'm going to pull down, see how my wrists are facing each other at this point, and then I'm going to pull down to the shoulder. And I'm at this bottom position. The common fault at the bottom position is to go like this, to round and shrug the shoulders. We talked about that earlier. It's important that we're training ourselves to roll the shoulders back and down with all of the exercises that we're doing. So then I'll come back up to full range of motion overhead, and I'll repeat by pulling down. The pull down test for overhead mobility. Next, I have a push-up test. And if you know that you're really good at push-ups, you can just look at your ability to do a regular push-up. But for people who are new to this, beginners, seniors, or young children, I would say to try an elevated push-up. And just pick a level where you're able to go through the full range of motion under control and pain-free. So I'm going to place, and then I'm going to place my hands outside of my shoulders, and I'm going to extend my body so I'm in a straight line from head, through the shoulders, through the hips, all the way down to the toes. From here, I'm going to descend into a push-up, and I'm coming down here. See how low on my body the bar is touching? Below my chest. The common fault here is to do a push-up where, again, I'm rounding and shrugging the shoulders. This is a common tendency. I want to train myself to be able to do a push-up with the shoulder blades retracted and depressed. And this is the angle that I would do that. So I'm not up at 90 degrees with the elbows relative to the shoulders. I'm at about a 45-degree angle. And then from there, the other fault is, as I get to here, to be lagging the hips, or the other thing is to sag the hips. I got to stay neutral through the hips, straight through the hips. All right, and then there's the next one is going to be a side plank. Okay, I'm going to lie on the ground, and there's several different versions of this exercise. The first one is just right here, hips on the ground, one elbow down on the ground, and then from here, can I open up the chest, head back, and hold this position sturdy. The common fault here is to round and shrug the shoulder. Again, I have to extend through the shoulder. The next level is where I'm going to have the lower leg stay on the ground, but I bridge the hips up and lift the hips up and forward. Okay? And then you'll do the other side. And you can see if one side is different than the other. If one side's harder than the other, you know that you have a little bit of an imbalance, and it's going to be worthwhile to focus on balancing that out. So the last test is going to be a bicycle test. The last thing for today, I would say if you just want to get started doing some form of exercise, and you're going to a gym or you have access to this, then a stationary bicycle may be one of the safest and most effective things to do. I have here an Airdyne bicycle, they call these, a fan wheel bicycle. This thing is sweet. I love this piece of equipment. Although it's a little bit advanced in the sense that it may be hard for some folks to be doing an upright bicycle. You may be better suited at first to be doing a recumbent bicycle where the pedals are out in front of you more so. You can see this one. I'm going to be sitting upright. So I would say to start with the recumbent bicycle. In either case, your setup is going to be really important on this. You want to make sure on a typical recumbent bicycle you're going to be sitting, you want to sit your hips flat and your head back against the seat in order to keep really good posture. You got the next consideration is to set your feet up properly. So this is too low for me. I'm going to bring it up a little bit because what I want is when my leg is extended down to the furthest point, I want to have a slight angle of my knee. If I'm too far, if I'm having to reach too far, that won't be great. If I'm not extending my knee enough, then that won't be the best either. So look at this 15-degree angle I have. That's perfect positioning. All right, and then what this test is basically you can choose. If you're really just starting out, maybe just do 3 minutes for this test. But if you're a little more advanced, then you can do up to 6 minutes on this. And you're going to take your heart rate again here before you start. So take another heart rate, see where you're at with that. It's probably going to be higher than where you started. And then from there, you're going to begin pedaling on the bike. And you're just going to go it doesn't have to be a super intense thing, just a medium pace, and you're going to finish either those 3 or those 6 minutes. If you're at a gym and you're on a bicycle at a gym, usually they have a screen. It will tell you on there how far you've traveled. It's either in miles or meters. Different ones have different units. But as long as you're using the same bicycle, you can track your progress this way. You can see where you're starting out from. So see how much distance you travel in that period of time. Then at the end, retake your heart rate and track all of this data. For all of those other tests, if you look at yourself in the mirror when you're doing them, or better yet, if you have somebody take a picture of you when you're doing them, that will tell you a lot of information about whether or not you're symmetrical when you're doing these. And then if you're working on them, you can see what your progress is. So tracking your progress is going to be part of being really motivated to stick with your exercise program. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please give us some feedback if you would. I'll put my information down below, and stay tuned for next week's show. Have a great day.